Right, I would try and give you some sort of pithy, cool beginning to this intro, but the longer I take to think about that, the longer it is for us to actually get into what's important. So let's go for it. I want to subvert some of the consistent narratives that come out of self-improvement, and particularly I want to focus on the sort of reframing some of these ideas that come out that are sort of, we assume we need to adopt. And the first one of these is the lonely chapter. Now, for those of you that don't know, the lonely chapter is essentially this idea that there comes a point along our journey where we need to sort of outgrow our friends. We have come to a point where the people who are around us are no longer on the same wavelength as us. And as a result, we've got to move on. We've got to fly the nest and find some others. Now, within this, there's a tremendous amount of truth. There is a lot of the time where you will need to move past the people that you're with at the moment, because you've just got to that stage of your life. You've outgrown people. If you're doing things to progress and improve and other people aren't, then you're going to see a divide between the two of you. And with that, your friendship will probably fall by the wayside. The problem that I think is coming out of this sort of lonely chapter thing is this idea that it is necessary to let people go, to cut friends. Now, I found a sort of feeling within myself of, if I'm not cutting people out of my life, I'm obviously not growing enough. I'm obviously not putting enough of a bridge or gap rather between the two of us. So I'm obviously doing something wrong. And the minute I thought of it in that way, I thought, how wrong is it to feel comfortable in the company of people? When we're framing it from this idea of the lonely chapter, if I'm moving forwards, I need to be making a divide between people. I've got to be losing friends, otherwise I'm not doing the right thing. I think you're actually asking to be lonely rather than just progressing in the right direction. I found myself in a bit of a trap with this, where I thought that if I wasn't losing friends, that I obviously wasn't growing enough because I wasn't losing friends. Now, when I say it like that, you realise how ridiculous it sounds. I heard Chris Williamson talking about this sort of, you're going to have to lose some of your friends as you grow. And as I say, though I totally agree this does happen, I think there is a real point to be made about not optimizing your friendship groups. I have noticed within myself that I have had this mind of thinking, can I always talk to this person about business or about doing things or about just progressive stuff? Can I do this with this person? And there have been a few people where I've thought, that's not quite the dynamic that's going on here. But we get along wonderfully well. I enjoy your company. I'm comfortable with you. And my life is happier as a result of being able to talk to you. If we optimize our friendship groups too much, we're going to suffer, because we're going to cut people out of our lives that are good for us. It is absolutely okay to have people who are just fun to be around, healthy fun. You can't have people around you who are bringing you down or who are negatively influencing you. But someone who is just not particularly interested in sort of chasing a career like that and are quite content with the way they are, you don't need to cut people out of your life in order to be improving. And I think we need to be careful that we don't get the wrong end of the stick here and find ourselves in a position where we're no longer sort of progressing, but we're doing acts that make us think we're progressing. I think the lonely chapter can also give us a sort of excuse to lean into the weaker sides of ourselves. If you're someone who's somewhat introverted, the lonely chapter appeals because you think, well, yeah, this is part of the journey though. It's the negative pain that is inherently positive. It is important to realise when it comes to your friends and your social life at large that this is an integral part of your life. Social media and self-improvement within that do not make enough of a point of how important it is to have friends. As silly as it sounds, you don't need to optimise your friendship groups in order to be successful. You want people around you who are playful, funny, comfortable people. And if you've got that element of business sort of hustle to it as well, wonderful. But a ironically helpful tip, I feel, is You have some friends where it's business and it's, you know, you've got that element to it, and you've got some friends where it's just relaxed. That's not where you are with that person. And in an ideal world, when we're lucky and when we do just continue to stave the course, you find the people that are in between the two. Do not cut people out of your life because you think they're not business savvy enough. It is ridiculous. Don't do that. Second point that I want to make is about moderating hedonism. Easy for me to say. So hedonism is essentially, if you're hedonistic, you're lustful, you party, you just fuck about, really. That's what hedonism is. I have noticed that as someone who has spent a long time abstaining from partying, from other degenerate forms of existence, I have noticed that I've come to a point in my existence where I want that more than I would have if I was doing it consistently. And I need to thread the needle a bit carefully here, because this is what I mean when I say moderate hedonism. But I think there's a place for actually incorporating things like going to parties or seeing friends and doing, parties is probably the easiest way for me to put this. I think there's a real place for doing that. And I think when it comes to self-improvement, we assume that we've just got to abstain from all of that entirely. I will speak from experience. Two things that have come from my endeavours here is, one, when you go so long without doing it, you sort of build up an energy within yourself that is now negative because you're feeling uncomfortable, and you're probably going to binge as well. If you don't do something that is towards your sort of more hedonistic side for a long time, it's reasonably likely that that energy is just going to build and build and build, and it will come out all at once. Like when someone doesn't eat shit food for a long time, and then all of a sudden they have something and they just go right off the boil because they haven't had it for so long. I think moderation is actually in many respects more important than abstinence, because, for instance, let's call a spade a spade. If you're a 20-year-old bloke and you've got certain energies going around in your body, if you abstain for a particularly long time, that's not actually healthy, because it's not the way that your body is anticipating it to be at the moment. But if you follow the self-improvement code by the book entirely, you will not be releasing certain energies that are, I'm trying to dodge the point here, but you know what I'm talking about. You won't be releasing parts of yourself that need to be released. I think self-improvement doesn't actually teach the importance of moderation, because a point I've made recently as well is, if you moderate, you choose to be in control. You're noticing in yourself an ability to go, I know where my boundaries are here, this is something I've got to keep an eye on. If you abstain entirely, in many respects, you're not actually teaching yourself to incorporate things. And I think self-improvement does quite a lot of that. I think it's this idea of sort of, if I just pretend it's not there, I'm not going to have any urges to go on any orange and black sites. You will, and that's fine. You need to learn to moderate these things and also find healthy ways of doing them. For instance, I didn't go out partying for 6 months, probably, maybe even more. And I went out this last weekend and I had a wonderful time. But the reason why I had a wonderful time was I towed the line perfectly between not going too far where you've just done too much. You've drunk too much, you've had too much of a good time, and you're paying for it in the coming days. But enough where you go, right, I've got that out of my system. And I think that's a really important point to remember, is you are a human, and you're also a human in the 21st century, where you've got lusts, you've got wants, you've got desires. That's fine. Don't beat yourself up for having wants and needs, particularly when you're young, because it's just part of your body. And I think we get into this sort of idea that we're somehow, when we choose to strive onwards and improve, we're somehow not a part of the human race anymore. It's like we don't hold ourselves to the same standards, because we go, well, everyone else might need to let their hair down every once in a while, but I don't. so I don't need to just follow those rules. You do. We are humans, and even those of us who decide to strive on for more and work for things that are really worth getting, even those of us that do that still need to satiate some hungers and just appeal to our human nature. We are humans, and within that there are things that you need to manage and control within yourself. I think the sooner you can learn to play the artful balance of work and play, the happier you will be. Because when you shut out the hedonistic behaviours entirely, you lose the benefits that come from them as well. And there are benefits that come from them. It won't sound good on a camera, but trust me, there is a real utility to the rest of your life in just going out and having a good time and having a party and doing something. The reason why that is so good is because it speaks to some of the most important parts of ourselves. It makes us feel alive. It makes us feel connected. It makes us feel like we're just having a good time. Heaven forbid you have a good time. You know, Hamza actually made a really great point about this, of people will avoid going out to things like parties because they assume that there'll be more growth in staying at home till and going to bed at 10 p.m, making sure you've done your meditating and stuff. He made a wonderful point on this of you will actually get more in terms of understanding the world and just generally improving your state of being by going to a party than you will about reading 3 books on how to socialise. 100%. I have noticed, as someone who has spent a lot of time away from social encounters, when you're away for too long, there's some real negative things that come out of that. You feel uncomfortable, you feel anxious, you can't really sort of communicate with people as well, and that is a negative thing. Self-improvement is not worth it if you can't actually function as a human. I think we sort of play down the importance of actually integrating into society when it comes to improving, because by the very nature of the game, you've got to sort of withdraw and not spend your time out in clubs every weekend, which you shouldn't do. And in doing that, we sort of take it 7 months further, and now we actually struggle to even sort of hold eye contact with someone, and that's a bad thing. We shouldn't get into the habit of thinking that the longer we're away from the world, the better, because in many respects it's not the case. And this is my point on moderation, is, in my opinion, you don't want to be going out every weekend, because you'll be hungover or some form of hangover for the next day afterwards. And that is not helpful in terms of your growth. If you're spending 2 days a week not actually sort of working on something because you're pissed, that's not the best thing. But if you're spending a few days a month where you've had a nice time out, you've gone and sort of gone for it, that's fine, and it will benefit you as well. I've noticed that my happiness has increased as a result of feeling connected to the world. I've spent a great deal of time feeling that disconnect as a result of my desires and my wants, and that's not always a good thing. There comes a point when you've got to cut that off. So my point there is to moderate hedonism. Don't cut things out so much, because there are benefits to them. The next point that I want to make on that is about females. So something that has been prevalent for me for the last year or so has been this idea that if I want to work and I want to improve, I want to get shit done, I can't have a relationship. Now, my thinking behind this was that if you are in a relationship, then you're not going to have as much time to work on what you want to work on by its very nature, because if you've got to put sort of a certain amount of time towards seeing someone, then that's a certain amount of time taken away from what you would otherwise be wanting to do. My previous relationship essentially fell apart on this point, that I was more focused on that than I was the relationship. Now, what I've realised with a understanding of looking at that relationship and looking at where I find myself now is that with the right person, that's not an issue. It's not an issue at all, because with the right person, you will find someone who is perfectly understanding of the fact that there are things you want, there are things that you need to strive towards. And on that point, someone will find that very attractive. Working towards things and striving for goals is an attractive trait in someone. And I don't think we really sort of make a point of that a great deal. My point, sort of slightly off to the side there, is with the right person, you add to yourself. You won't subtract. And I think I have sort of toyed with this idea for a while now, that if I'm with someone, I'm somehow losing a part of myself. When in actual fact, when you choose the right person and when you find someone that really is you're compatible with, you will benefit from that. This world is not to be lived on its own. I am almost certain of that. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people sort of fall into being an incel, and then stay there and think that it's fine to stay there. Now, as someone who is there, it's not. There comes a point where it's just there's something there where it's like, fuck me, what am I, like, you need to work towards things, but you also need to be a fucking human being, and you need to actually have a relationship with someone and bring that into your life. It calls back to the same idea as sort of moderate hedonism, is in many respects, you need to sort of de-optimize to optimize. I notice in myself that if I was to go, say, let's put it into a numbers game. If I was to do 4 hours of work for 7 days, I would actually be achieving less than if I was to do 4 hours of work for 4 days and the other 12 hours that I have sort of given up on that was spent with friends. I would be more productive. And the reason why I would be more productive is because I'm satiating the desires that are needed for my world, that social element. The social element of the human mind is absolutely critical, and we don't talk about it enough. On the point of relationships, don't shut that out entirely. I do think I'm speaking from somewhat of a privileged position here. I've sort of gone past the good part now. There is, in sort of bouts, if you just come out of a relationship, don't get back into one. Take some time on your own, and maybe 6 months, or don't even plan it. Don't go, right, in 6 months' time I'm going to do this, but sort of be open to being on your own for a bit, because it is important and you will learn a lot from being on your own. I've learned a tremendous amount and improved my relationship with myself a tremendous amount as a result of being on my own. But as I touched on there, it has now gone to the point where it's like, yeah, the benefits aren't as prevalent now. You'd find more benefit in feeling connected to someone. I think one of the most important parts of our human mind is connection and feeling a part of the world. So do feel a part of the world, because there's nothing wrong with that. Now, an interesting idea that has sort of percolated in my head for the last few weeks. I have noticed that since coming back onto social media, I've sort of felt like I've fallen down a rabbit hole of sorts. I spent so long away from it, and now I'm coming back in because I need to put the podcast out. And as a result, I'm sort of worried that I'm becoming a degenerate somehow because I'm back on social media after not being on it for so long. This feeling was exacerbated by me realising that every single time I go anywhere, I wear like one of 4 things. Now, I spent a long time with this mind of, you don't need to worry about what clothes you're wearing, who cares? Until I realised that I looked fucking homeless. And in looking homeless, I think we really need to make a point of towing the line between being obsessed with something that is negative, as in social media, or paying too much attention to your body image, and not doing enough of that. I noticed that when today, I've got a nicer shirt on than I normally would, because I actually spent some fucking money on some clothes, and don't look as homeless as a result. in doing that, I feel better about myself, but I had to get over the hurdle of thinking, am I somehow pretentious now because I'm spending money on clothes and I'm on social media? When you say it in that way, where you think you've spent money on clothes, you're now on social media every day, it sounds bad. But then when you look at inwardly, right, what have I got from that? Well, I'm on social media every day because I'm putting the podcast out there and I need to be, and I've bought clothes that make me more comfortable in myself, and as a result, back to the point that we said just there, I can show up for the world in a better way. There are a number of malignant side effects that come from this sort of detaching from society that we are in many respects obliged to do when we improve. One of them is assuming that there is no negatives to be found in some of the unanimous behaviours of the world. Some of the things like spending money on clothes so that you look nice, or being on social media so that you're in the loop on with regard to connection, or going out to parties because you want to have a good time. These things, when they're done too much, are a problem. But in moderation, they're actually really good for you. They help you. And I think it's not going to be a popular point of, oh yeah, it's going to really benefit you to party, because it just doesn't make any sense. Like what we've been told for so long when it comes to improvement and growth is that you need to pull away from the rest of society. And if you want to get better at things in many respects, you do. But there are some things that the world gets right. As I touched on there is utility and value in being connected to the world through going out on the weekend. Don't get the wrong end of the stick when it comes to this, because too much of it is a problem. But if you just totally remove yourself from society, you're not going to actually benefit from that in the long term, because we can try and play the vigilante, rogue, lone wolf as much as we want, but we live in a society, and if we can't integrate into that society because we're too fucking stuck in our mother's basements, proverbially, if we can't actually have conversations with people because we're thinking we're so stoic because we don't spend our money on clothes, or we don't go on social media, or we don't go out to parties, we're in bed at 10 p.m, if we get too far down that rabbit hole, we become fucking weird, and in being weird, all of the benefits that you have created for yourself for the good, you won't experience any of the good from that, because you can't integrate, and we need to integrate with the rest of the world. If you are the lone wolf who doesn't speak to people, who doesn't actually have at least a toe in society, if you're not that person, you're not going to be happy. This is a social world, and I think we can embrace this idea of calling back to the sort of lonely chapter idea. We can embrace it to a point where we sort of think that we're achieving something by actually regressing, because we assume that in spending more time alone, or not going on social media, or not going out to parties, whatever, in doing that we are progressing, when in actual fact we're becoming more and more reserved, and we're becoming the hermit that can't integrate. And the hermit that can't integrate is not a happy one. That's I will shout from the rooftops about that, and I'm sure I shall continue to do so. On that point, there's something I've been thinking about recently. Think before you speak. Now, this is something that we have been told for a long time now. Everyone has been told before that you should, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it, and you need to make sure you think before you speak. But we don't actually do it. And I think a lot of people would benefit, in fact, everyone would benefit from taking some time before you start talking to someone to really think about what it is that you're saying. I think we assume that the minute someone tells us something, or says something to us, or asks us something, that we need to respond. You don't. Take some time to actually think about what it is that is being said to you. Or if you hear an idea about something, think about it, then say something to someone. You don't need to be high octane with conversation all the time. You can be slow. And in being slow as well, you will say the things you actually want to say. A lot of the time, the things that we say that we regret saying will be said on a whim. They'll be said just out of lack of thought, just saying the whatever comes to mind. When you actually think about what it is that you're saying and you make a habit of doing that, you protect yourself from stupidity, and you also open yourself up to really projecting your character the way that you should. Because when you think about something and think about what it is that you want to actually say to someone, you say what you're actually feeling. You don't fall into this trap of just sort of running with the narrative of the conversation, as we so often do. You actually provide your own opinions on something, and you speak from your heart. And in speaking from your heart, you live a much better life. You will enjoy the world a great deal more when you actually say what you mean. You also won't lie as much. And I think a lot of people sort of accidentally tell white lies, even something as benign as agreeing with an opinion when it comes to Trump or something like that. We just go, oh yeah, what an idiot, what a twat. Rather than really taking the time to actually think, what do I think about what has been said, rather than just running with. I use Trump as an example because everyone, particularly in England, has got this sort of idea around him. And when someone says the name, the idea follows, the fact that he's a ponce. And people run with it rather than actually stopping and thinking, what do I actually think about him? Is there anything I disagree or agree with here? And on that point, when you think about what it is that you're saying, you improve your mind to such an extent, and in doing so, you open yourself up to improve it more by asking questions. When you think before you speak, you then highlight the parts of your being that are not yet cultivated. If you don't know what Trump has done recently, when you think, what do I actually think about Trump? Is he as much of an idiot as this person is saying? You can then go, oh, actually, why do you think he's an idiot? What's going on? And then you're in there. You're actually learning something from that. We can fall into this trap with speech where we assume that we just need to run with the first thought that comes to our head. And I tell you that as a result of spending quite a lot of time really trying to cultivate a stronger sense of communication and ability to orate, in doing that, I have noticed that I've got myself out of so many positions, so many times where before I would have had an argument with someone or I would have said something that would have got me in trouble. I'm not doing that anymore because I'm actually taking the time to think. We don't have to be spontaneous and responsive and impulsive with what it is that we say. And if we do, we're actually going to negatively impact ourselves. We need to be careful not to do this. And I think it's such a funny phenomenon on this, that this won't be new to you. You will have heard someone say, think before you speak. We know to think before we speak, but we don't actually do it. That's the point. And if you do it, if you actually if you spend the time actually just going through the motions of learning how to have a conversation and have the pauses that need to be in there to actually sort of go with what it is that you're trying to say. When you do that, you show up for the world in a much better way. And on that point, don't feel uncomfortable with holding silence in conversations, because it's very useful. It's very, very useful to do that. If you can hold silence in conversations, you actually add more poignancy to your words. And I think a lot of the time people think that the minute someone says something, you've got to answer. If someone speaks to you, you can very much go, yeah, and then carry on. You don't have to answer straight away. There will be a bit of a teething process that comes with you incorporating this, because you'll sort of do it either too much or not enough, or it won't feel right because it's new. But there will come a point where if you just try your best to cultivate this version of yourself that learns when and where to say what should be said, you will improve tremendously. I think the point to round out today's video is there are some underlying parts of self-improvement that aren't really given the light of day, and when they are, the whole world becomes a lot brighter. Now, on that poetic note, I'm going to leave this one. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching. I love you all. And rather than carry on talking shit into the mic that I don't know how to end the video, I'm going to try and end the video. See you in a bit.